As we start the lesson this morning, I'm going to tell you up front, it's going to make it easy. If you want to come tell me that wasn't politically correct, you don't have to, because I already know. What I'm going to share with you is not going to be considered politically correct by the world. I don't know if Facebook will ban me because of what I have to say, if that's possible. But I hope and pray that this congregation doesn't look at the idea of politically correct, but looks at the idea of spiritually correct. Amen. And so we're going to talk about some things. Last week, we talked about some challenging things. This week, we're going to talk about some challenging things. And we're going to talk about the idea of being the father that God created you to be. Not being the father that you've decided to be. Not being the father that you think you want to be. But actually being the father that you were created to be. And in a lot of ways, I could replace the term father with the term man. And many of these things would apply even if you didn't have children. But there's a problem in the world today about the idea of a man being a man. There just is. And there's a problem today about a woman being a woman. There's this misunderstanding of what those two individuals are, how they were created differently, and how they were designed for two different but equally important roles. And the world says that for some way it's not equal if you say a woman works in the home and a man works in the world. That's not equally important. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. And the reason that it's so important and we can see it is because look at all the homes where there's no parent, where there's no mother raising the kids. So what's happened? What's happened with the church? What's happened in the world? People have forgotten their roles. And they have listened to people that have said, we talked about it was great, we talked about in our class, we talked about like this woman went and told people, and they began to believe it, but then it was confirmed by the source. And they mentioned that truly now we believe not because this woman told us, but because we have heard her. So even within the church, folks, even within the Lord's church, we got to go back to the Bible. Amen. We got to go back to the Bible, and we have to consider some things and ask ourselves, what does it really mean to be the man or the father that God created you to be? As we look at this, again, there are going to be some things that are going to maybe make people uncomfortable, and I'm okay with that. If it makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to look in the Word to find out. The first thing we understand, and it was in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, is we are to train our children up in the way of the Lord. The father is to be the spiritual leader of the family. But how often do we see it's the mother that's had to take that role? And the mother takes that role because the father doesn't do what the father was supposed to be doing. Because he's forgotten what his responsibility is. In his mind, maybe he thinks, I work 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week. Well, I'll tell you, if you're working 60 hours a week, you're doing too much and you should be spending time with God. I don't hear anybody saying you complain about working a 60-hour work week because that's a choice. But to use that as an excuse to say, so I can't spend time with my kids because I'm too tired when I get home, because I have a wife and I can say, hey, honey, go take care of that. Make sure those kids are reading the Bible. Make sure those kids are saying prayers. Make sure should the woman absolutely as a mother help to nurture the child spiritually? Yes. But who is supposed to be the leader? And who, unfortunately, in some instances, has relinquished that? In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7, so going back to the beginning, he says, "And these words that I command you today," again, not suggest, not this would be a good idea if you did it this way, but there's a different option, because that's what the world says. The world says you have another option. He says it's a command. When you're commanded to do something, is there an option? There's not. In the military, if you're commanded that you have to go to this position overseas, you go. There's no option. Why? Because it was a command. It's something that you have to do. And so he says, these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. How often should you be talking to your children about spiritual things? I think that pretty well covers all the time, doesn't it? I think that's exactly right. I think the point is that pretty much covers all of the time. First Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. And I want you to, have you ever seen this? You see a father, and he's mowing the lawn, or he's doing something, and right there the little one's behind with whatever they have so that they can imitate what he's doing, right? When they're young, they make statements like, I want to be like Daddy. I want to be like Dad. As they get older, sometimes they don't have that same desire anymore. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that if they don't want to be like Dad anymore? Well, if you're not taking the time, you know what this man could say to his children? Get out of the way. There's not a whole lot of room there for them to be doing the cleaning, right? You know, if your child comes up and says, can I help? Even though, as my wife likes to say, sometimes your help is not helping. Sometimes you got to let them do it, right? You got to let them do it so that they can understand that you care and love them. And so, if they want to be like Dad, Dad needs to imitate Paul as Paul imitates Christ. You want your kids to imitate the things that you do? Go beyond cleaning a room to wanting to go to Bible study. Go beyond just, I want to sit and have a prayer before whatever it is. Then they'll want to do that too. Right? But we have to set a spiritual example as fathers. And oh, by the way, you could put men there. We have to be a spiritual example that young children want to imitate. But I don't think that we always do that. I don't think we always even apply that. Children will watch your actions and do as you do because they want to be just like Dad. Right? And oh, by the way, just a sub point, the same thing is true with mothers, right? But we talk about that on Mother's Day. Same thing, sure. Kids want to be like, but you know what? That's not happening in the world today, is it? How many kids grow up saying, I hate my parents? I don't like my parents, right? Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? That the children took control and decided instead of the parents, right? Now, as they get older, if they want to hate me because I'm asking them to do spiritual things, that's another discussion. But the point is that your children grow up with a natural desire to love and want to be like you. Are we pushing them off onto be like this particular basketball player, be like this particular musician, be like this? No. But when we say be like me, which is what we're supposed to say as a father, we better be doing what the Bible says, that we're acting like Christ, right? Because I've heard people say, I've heard fathers say in front of kids, pardon my French, but, and then they use an expletive. Well, you know what? If your children do as I say and not as I do, guess what? They're going to do as you do. Whether you tell them to or not. If you do it enough, they're going to emulate who you are. Created to leave spiritually. I really have enjoyed, just as a subpoint, the ability to kind of create some of these images. Again, this is AI generated, but one of the things, I could go in and change the name of the building that they're walking into. I could change the sign that they had on there, which is really great, because I want you to see in this particular case, leading spiritually means you're all going into the services together. And oh, look, by the way, look at the closeness between the child and the parent. Child holding on to mom, child holding on to dad. What's that? That's closeness, isn't it? That's because those children love and respect their mother and father, but that's because their mother and father did what they're supposed to do. And oh, by the way, a lot of times this picture you might have cut off. You might have it cut right here, where you have the boy and those two. Is that dad leading spiritually? But it does happen. You might even get this. The dad keeps the son home and plays with them instead of coming to services. Is that a good example? I'm going to tell you right now, as I was growing up, if my mom and dad had differences of opinion on whether or not you should be going to worship service, if I had a choice between staying home and playing and watching cartoons and hanging out with dad or mom, whichever, and going and sitting and listening to some guy like me stand up here for 35 to 40 minutes, I'd pick the other every time. You just would. Because as children, it's hard. It's hard for these little ones to sit here in an audience to take it. So do I just say, well, you know what? It's too hard on you to do that, so I'm going to keep you at home until I think you're old enough not to disrupt. You know, by that point, it's too late. I'll tell you right now, if your child is a distraction during a worship service, the preacher appreciates it. And probably so do most of the members, because of the fact that you're leading them spiritually and you brought them here. Knowing that that's where they are. And let's be honest, it's not just the kids that have a hard time sitting in the audience right now listening to me for 35 minutes. Some of you are saying, I don't want to listen to this guy for 30 to 35 minutes. Sometimes you're saying, I don't want to listen to this guy for 60 minutes. And what you're really saying at that point probably is, I didn't want the 5 minutes. But the truth is, whether you like the speaker or not makes no difference from a standpoint of how they present the message. What matters is the message that they're pretending. Actually, not pretending, presenting. There's a time. What matters is what they're presenting. Regardless of their style, regardless of how they talk. And you know what? You're not a good example if you go home in front of your little ones and talk about how boring that preacher was. You're not a good example if you go home and you complain about the singing. You're not a good example. If you want to talk about those things with your spouse and discuss things between a mom and that's great, that's fine. But is that really what you want your children hearing? And so again, as a father, supposed to lead spiritually, if there's something negative you feel about what happened at the assembly, in front of the kids, keep it to yourself. Because you're not helping. Because then once you say something, they're going to add to it, or they're going to agree, right? Because they're young and dad's, oh, I agree. Dad must be right. That was crummy. So why go back? Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, is that 100% absolute fact? No. A proverb is a generalization that tends to carry out and be true. But do I want to say, well, because it's not fact, it's only a possibility, I won't train them right? If you don't train them the way they should go, then they're going to do whatever they want anyway. There's a 100% chance that they're not going to do right if you don't train them. Because they're going to do what they want to do. And until there's consequences for doing something, as long as I get to do whatever I want to do, I will continue to do it. That's just truth. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 7. The righteous person behaves in integrity. A righteous father behaves with integrity so his children can see that. The righteous person behaves in integrity. Blessed are his children after him. So if he's not acting righteous, his children aren't going to be blessed for the way that he acts, right? Spiritual leaders have a responsibility, and it will determine in many ways how your child chooses to grow up. God created man to love as he does. And I know you can't really see this picture real well. This is a man standing on a porch with a porch light, and he's watching and waiting for his son to come home. Fathers, mothers even. How many of you sat up late at night because you told your child they could go out and do something, but you're not going to go to bed until they get home? You know what? A good father will stay awake. A good mother will stay awake. Because if you go to bed, you don't know what time that child came home. You're not sure what they did. And you know what? If they find that you're asleep when they come in, guess what? Well, I don't really have to be there at 9 because they're going to be in bed anyway. I'm going to wait till 9:30 or 10. You watch and you wait because... But you ask people today, you go to somebody's home today and you ask them where the kids are, they'll say, I don't know. They're out doing something. You don't know where your kids are? You don't know what they might be doing? Do you really love and care for them? You don't know where they are. If they need you, you can't get to them, so you must not care. If you don't know what they're doing and they get hurt, you must not care. Right? Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 24, we're all familiar with. The parable of the prodigal son. And there are so many different ways that this is done. But I just want to look at a couple of things that we find from this particular parable, or things that we can learn. And there are three things as we watch this father that he's doing. Let's go ahead, let's read it. I know some of you are saying, Rob, you just said we don't want 30 to 35 minutes. I want to read it. I want to read it. So go to Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11, and we'll read them by section as we look at what this father is doing. Beginning in verse 11, it says, "And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of the country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he gladly would have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave them anything." And then look at verse 17. When he came to his senses, he recognizes what kind of father he had. Stop and think about this. He recognizes when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against you from and heaven before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like the one of your hired servants. That father had to wait for that son to come to his senses. I can tell you right now, as a good father, I believe that he was watching and he was waiting and he was hoping to hear of the good return of the safety of his son. He probably wanted to know that things were going well if he truly loved his son, and I believe he did. I believe he did. And he waited on a lot. But what are some things also within this? While he's waiting, we see what kind of father he was. Because obviously, that father had taught his children about God, because he says, I have sinned against heaven, right? Well, how would he know about sinning against, how would he know about sin if he wasn't taught properly, right? How would he, so we know, but he waits. Verses 20 and 21. And he arose and came to his father. But when his father saw him a great way off, okay, he's looking out, right? He's been waiting, he's looking out, and when he sees him coming, he doesn't wait for his son to come. It says, and he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion. He didn't wait for him to come and say, well, you know what? You blew it, son. You blew it. You took the inheritance that I had for you when you shouldn't have taken it, but I allowed you to go ahead and do it, and you blew it, and now you have nothing. Is that how he responds to his son? He has compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Just because you're disappointed, a father who is disappointed in their child should still love them the way God loves you. Because I guarantee you, as God is the father of us as his children, we disappoint him. We disappoint him, we make mistakes. And how would we like it if he took the attitude that I just made? Shame on you, no compassion, it's all your fault, you did it to yourself. That's not the way God handles it, is it? That's not the way this father handles it, is it? But I want you to know, he's going to welcome him, but I want you to know one thing. Never does he approve of. And make sure you catch that. He doesn't approve of what his child has done. He's thankful that his child has come back. What does that sound like? That sounds like to me like maybe a wayward person. A wayward person who chooses to come back And that's the focus and the compassion that God the Father has. And I've done lessons on God as the ultimate Father. But the idea of welcoming him. And as we look at this, verse 22, the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. And then he says, why? For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. He was excited to know that his child had been found. He didn't worry about all the money that he gave him that was waste, that didn't belong to him in the first place. He didn't worry. He recognized, but again, we don't see approval. And then we see the response of the other brother who's very upset, right? And he has to explain to him. And he does, right? He's a good father. He loves his other son too. And he reminds his other son, you've always been with me, and all that I have is yours. Son, I still love you too. The fact that I love my child who's come back does not change my love for you. Right? I love both my children. He doesn't say, I love you more. He doesn't say, I love you less. He says, I'm thankful that the one that was lost is found or is back. So we're created to love the way that God has loved. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 19, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. I'm going to tell you right now, let's just say it up front, that can be hard. Loving your, and I'm going to say spouse, I'm not going to say just loving your wife, because loving your husband can be hard. And it can be really hard not to be harsh. You come home from work, everything went wrong. You get home, and your wife tells, usually she's great, she has food for you and everything. She tells you, we're not going to be able to eat for a while because I got to go out and get some things because I forgot to do dinner. You what? Don't you care about me? I've been at work all day, and you're not prepared to welcome me with something to eat? Wife comes to you and says, you know what? So-and-so did something wrong. You need to go talk to him. You say, why do I need to go talk to him? Didn't you take care of this? Christian will tell you, I am not a guy that's easy to love all the time. Because I'm a guy. I'm a person. We all have moments where it's not easy to be loved. But if the person truly loves us, they still do. Right? See, that's where the world gets it wrong. They think that if you get married, the minute your spouse does something that you don't love that they did, that you just don't love them anymore. Well, you never loved them truly in the first place, if that's the case. It's not easy, and never, ever should you create a scene in front of your children. Bad enough that you're hard on mom, or you're disrespectful to dad, or disrespectful to the husband. Bad enough that it even exists. But you amplify it tremendously, and you are not being a spiritual example if you do it in front of your children. And that's because, what did we say earlier? Children do what dad does. Children want to do what mom does. So it's okay to be harsh, and it's okay to be disrespectful. That's just normal. As a young lady growing up, you think, it's okay for my husband to be mean to me. Because dad was mean to mom. That's just the way it is. The son says, it's okay for me to be harsh to my wife because that's what dad did. So what do you possibly end up with? You possibly end up with a son who's a wife beater, and you end up with a daughter who's a beaten wife. Because of your example. It's okay. Husbands, love your wives and do not. And oh, by the way, this is a picture, and I had to tell Kristen because she'll tell you that I'm not really good about being the most affectionate in front of people. I'm much more comfortable being affectionate with my wife when the kids aren't around and all of that. But you know what? If my children never see me hug my wife in front of them, if my children never see me show that I love and cherish her, then they're going to assume that they don't have to either. See, Christian, you get the good with the bad. You get the good with the bad. I pick on her a lot, but she knows I love and cherish her, and she knows that The kids need to see that. And I think my parents know. I think if you asked Jackson or you asked even Trinity or you asked Jared, I hope Derek would know. But if you went up and asked them, do you think your mom and dad really love one another? I believe they'd say yes. Jared, would you say yes? Yeah, on the spot, but I believe they would. But that's not necessarily always the case if it's not expressed. And so if it's something that's difficult, you work at it. You work at it. You know, when you come together, two as one, not everything is perfect. Both of you have things that you need to adapt to. You just do. But that's because you're two individuals. And so if you really love one another, if you want your children to know, you have to adapt to some things. It says, likewise, husbands, 1 Peter 3:7, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman. Fathers, do you show that you honor your wife? And here's where we start getting politically incorrect. You honor the woman as what? The weaker vessel. Oh, you can't say that. Women aren't weaker than men. I'd be happy to arm wrestle any woman here. And I'm not strong. Women are the weaker vessel. They're made that way. That's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, he says, honor her for that. Because if you have two type A's, what do you get? Boom, boom, boom all the time. Honor her as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Again, whether your children see this or not, whether you have children or not, it doesn't say, husbands, if you have children, do these things. This is about be the father. Subpoint, if you don't have not everybody will be a father. Subpoint, be the man God created you to be. Because just because you don't have kids doesn't mean you can be harsh to your wife. Well, I don't have any children to set a bad example to, so no, that's not what we're saying. That's not what God intends. Okay, it took me hours. I kid you not, it took me hours to find anything that I could have created that remotely represented a father disciplining a child. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I changed the wording in the AI to try to make it, it would say that's inappropriate for us to put. You can't have a father standing over their child telling them they're doing wrong. But you know what? There's all kinds of pictures of kids showing disrespectful faces to their parents. That's not unacceptable. But and I don't even remember how I found this, but look how phased out it is. But if you can tell, he's letting the child know something's not right. But that says something to me about what's happened in society today. I didn't say, give me a picture of spare the rod, spoil the child. Show me beating a child. And I don't believe that's beating. But I didn't make it in such a way that it sounded something terrible. But you couldn't do it because parents are afraid to discipline. And then the beauty of that is you're in a store. You're in a store and your kids are running wild. Your kids are running wild. Other people are watching, and what are they saying? Why don't you do something about that? Why don't you take care of those kids, but then don't discipline them? How's that going to work out? It's not going to happen. A swat on the behind for everybody those of you out that are seeing this live, a swat on the behind is not corporal punishment. If you want to know what corporal punishment is, go and talk to somebody that served in the military. Swat on the behind is not corporal punishment. And you know what? If you don't train them and discipline and teach them to respond to you, there can be all kinds of problems. Quick example, because I will never forget this. I remember, I don't know where we were. I remember we were in a park in a grass field somewhere. And I think at the time we only had Jared. And we're sitting there, and she and I are, and he's a little over by himself. And there's a snake coming up on Jared. And I didn't give him an explanation of any reasons why. I said, Jared, get up and move over here right now. And like that, he responded. But you know what? If I hadn't trained him to respond, if I had let it be that, well, I had to give him a reason every time if I have to give him a reason for something every time he does it, by the time I give him the reason, the snake's on him. Like that. That's what you want, isn't it? You can see a car coming when your child's about to cross the street. They don't, for whatever reason, see it. You yell at them to stop, and they turn around and say, why? And what happens? Yeah. What happens? But if you've trained them to listen, if you've disciplined them when they don't listen to you, they're going to listen to you. We were created to discipline, but no, in a certain manner. We have to discipline using wisdom. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. The Bible says if you're not ready to discipline your child, you can say that you love them all you want, but the truth is you don't. You don't love them enough to help them so that they don't make the same mistake the next time. You just don't. It doesn't say in there, it's a good time. A father likes to spank his children. You know, I used to tease my kids and tell them, I don't want to spank you because it hurts my hand too. And they would laugh just a little bit. So I said, but don't get to a point where you make me have to spank you, because then we're both going to hurt. But the truth is, they say, oh, this is, you hear this is going to hurt me far worse than it does you. You know what? In a lot of ways, that statement's true. If you truly love your child. If you don't truly love your child, then a little smack means nothing to you. No one wants to have to be the disciplinarian, but the father has to do it. That's what God created him to do, right? Otherwise, you get what we have in the world today. You get what we have in the world today. Everybody running amok, doing whatever they want because there's no consequences. I've had this discussion before. I love Jared enough that if he were put into a jail for something and had to go to jail for a couple of days, I would not come and bail him out. Christians might disagree, but Christian also recognizes that we have to stand as parents, and she would suffer in a lot of ways, probably more than I do, but he wouldn't be let out. Why? Because I would want him to recognize the consequences. Because they may say, hey, you can take him home, but then he gets off scot-free, right? No. You have to suffer the consequences for your actions. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 15, then verse 17. The rod and reproof give wisdom. Okay, so disciplining your child makes them smarter. That's not what Rob says, that's what God says. Well, how can disciplining a child make them smart? Well, they know not to do it the next time. They're smarter because they know this isn't a good thing to do. But if there's no discipline, they're no smarter, and they're going to do it again. Wow, who in the world today says disciplining your child will make them smarter? They say, oh no, you're crushing their spirit. Oh no, you can't do that. You can't tell them they've done something bad. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. God says you should. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings a shame to his mother. So not only are you not getting smarter if you're not disciplined, but the way that you act. Other people say, oh, well, they don't say that's what Jared and Jackson and Trinity did. They say, oh, that's just Christians' kids. That's just the mom's kids. And she's ashamed at how they act. It's embarrassing. How many of you like it, parents with young children, or if you had how many of you enjoyed it when you had to take your child down the aisle in the middle of a worship service and take them out? How many of you felt really good about the fact that you had to do this? How many of you felt kind of ashamed at the way the child was acting? young children want to please their parents, right? We talked about that. So if they understand, it's okay to say that what you're doing, what you did not only is wrong for your action, but you make mommy look bad. Oh, I don't want to make mommy look bad, right? I'm sorry, I didn't know. But only a spiritual father, a spiritual man, a spiritual woman will point those things out. He says, discipline your son, and he will give you rest and delight to your heart. Why? Because if you discipline them, you know that they're not going to go out and do it again. I've been blessed to have a child that would tell on himself. My oldest child used to tell on himself. He'd feel so bad that he did something wrong that he'd come and he'd say, Dad, I got to tell you what I did. And I would tell him, well, I said, if you tell me, this might mean we have to do something. He'd feel so he'd have to do it. And I'd say, okay, well, here's your punishment. How many of you would say, oh, Mom and Dad never found out, right? Mom and Dad never knew. No, he would feel that's a heart of understanding, by the way. That's a heart of understanding. But you know that he doesn't want to do it the next time. For whatever reason, he felt he did something wrong and it was changed. Maybe he felt bad about how it looked to Mom. Maybe he felt bad he did something. Whatever it was enough that he needed to. But you can have rest and you can feel confident. To this day, we're learning a lot in my family what it means when your first child starts to break away. We're learning a lot. And I have a son who has such respect that he still calls and asks to do things, even though he's 21 years old. And sometimes I'll just tell him, Jared, you can make your but he wants approval. He wants to make sure he's not doing something wrong. When I went and bought my first car at a dealership, I told him, I said, my dad has to see this car before and they said, what, you have to listen to your dad? You're old enough to make your own decision. I said, yes, I am old enough to make my own decision. I said, but I respect his, and if his decision is it's a bad idea, I have to consider that. And the guy was dumbfounded. To this day, I still call Dad for things that are important. Christian still calls her mother when things are important. How many of us have seen children that have grown up and they want nothing to do with what their parents have to say? Or they will say, well, this is what my parents would do, so I'm going to do something else. Well, that all starts from how you raise them up as a spiritual leader in the family, as how they grow. That all happens from that. But I don't have a problem. I don't worry that Jared's going to go out and get drunk. He says he's staying out till 12 o'clock. I say, okay. You know what? If he was a child that was a problem all the time, and I knew he was a problem all the time, even though I would discipline him, if he still kept messing up, I would have to pay more attention. Right? Is every child the same? Not even in the account of the prodigal son. They were two and they were different. One said, I want my stuff now before I deserve it. The other stayed and wanted. So, as a father, you have to love your children enough to discipline them. You have to do it wisely, but you have to know who they are. And it makes it easier. It makes it easier. And instead of going out and doing dumb things, your child will do things that make you proud. Instead of going out and getting drunk, your child is picking people up and bringing them to a Bible study. That brings delight to the heart, doesn't it? Because they have a choice. They have a choice. Mark down in your notes Proverbs chapter 23, verses 13 and 14. I'm not going to read those now. You can consider those. But I want to look at one other thing. And I think this is, again, where we're going to start entering the realm of not politically correct. But if you go back and you look at the statement that's made here, the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work and to take care of it. A lot of people try to tell you that man wasn't intended to work until after the fall. It's not true, is it? There was work that was intended that man do. But something changed. Something changed. Genesis chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain shall you bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Way back from the beginning. Does it say he should be a dictator? No. But is he supposed to rule the household? Well, that's not politically correct. You know what? If you have two people with two different ideas, ultimately at some point, one of them has to make the ultimate decision or nothing gets done. And you can't do nothing. So there is, and it's not politically correct, but if people know their roles, it's not a problem. And if a husband loves and cherishes his wife, as it's talked about by Paul, then the decision that they make isn't going to be ruling them anyway. It's going to be taken in love and concern for what's best for them. I don't know if my wife grew up in a military family. She moved a lot. I grew up in a home where I didn't leave till I went off to college, actually to graduate school. I'm thinking, she's probably thinking, man, this guy's going to have stability. We're going to stay in one place. I'm not going to have to move all the time. I think we've probably moved 10 times in a short period of time that we were married, and it was all in a short period. I can tell you when I first told Christian that it was time for me to consider becoming a preacher because I was temporarily out of work and it was a good time to do it, I wasn't sure what to expect. Because at one point, because she grew up and she saw what happens in a family where a home has a preacher, it takes a lot to be the spouse of a preacher. And they see a lot. And I think that, sometimes I must have been a good salesman for her to want to go ahead and get married. But I know that she was not thrilled about the idea of marrying a preacher. And so she was always like, it's great if he wants to do this. I know he needs to do it. I always did it part-time. But this idea of doing it permanently and what that means, not only to me, but what it means to her. And not only that, but she's concerned about what it means to her children, because everybody says, you've heard the term PK, preacher's kid. They are held to a higher standard by the world than other Christians. Not that they should be. So it's not difficult. So as we move on, he says to Adam, because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, again, no choice, I commanded you, saying you shall not do it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. And he says, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. He was set to guard and to tend, to do a. He says now it's going to be, your labor is going to be in toil, right? You're going to deal with thistles and all these things. I don't know. I do know that the Garden of Eden paradise was perfect. I don't know that the thorns and thistles that he dealt with after he was removed from the garden existed in paradise. I don't know. It's just kind of a random speculation. What I do know is he lets him know that you're going to have to work. He doesn't tell the woman, in pain you're going to have childbirth, and you will toil and labor and work. Right? Doesn't say that. Says that this is what's happened to the woman, and here's the consequences. And this is what's happened to the man, and here's the consequences. And guess what? They're different. That's taboo in the world. That's taboo. Their responsibilities are different. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more politically incorrect. You ever see one of those signs? Sure. At the time, did you think it meant that it was the universal and that it meant men and women, or did you think it meant men at work? I believe when the signs were put together, they understood that this was a place where men were at work. Right? I've never seen one of those that says woman at work. Or women at work. I think there was a time where people understood the differences in jobs and roles that people have. Think about it. People talked about the milkman delivered. It's politically incorrect. The postman. You can't say those terms anymore, right? They'll tell you you're wrong. Here's another one. I've heard of a manager, but I've never heard the term womager. It doesn't exist. Because we were designed for different roles. We let society change what God had created the Father to be. We let it happen. How does that happen? First, you tolerate it. Or first you disapprove, then you tolerate. You disapprove for a while, then you tolerate. It is what it is. Then you just accept it. That's what happened. You know, you get real upset first. You're like, man, this shouldn't be happening. And you speak out against it. And then, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. Are you smiling, Jim? It doesn't matter what I say. I'll just accept the fact that this is the way it is. And you let it happen, right? It went from it's sinful to I'll tolerate it to this is the way it is. Well, then I have to ask the question. If God's, and I'm not saying a woman can't work if she can fulfill her roles as a mother at home. I'm not saying that. We have examples of women in the Bible that are able to do both. But what comes first? You know what? Men and women are different. Men and women are different. People don't want to say that. I already talked about men are physically stronger. They just are. They physically have more stamina and strength to do things. Women are much more nurturing than men. They're much more kind. They're soft. That's okay. Kids need both. Kids need both. Kids don't need mom and dad both working because then they're not getting raised. Kids don't need, and this is going to step on some toes of people in the church. Kids don't need mom at work and dad playing Mr. Mom. I just don't believe that that's the way that God intended it. Show me anywhere where he talks about that. Are there times when it's necessary for that to take place? Yes. But right now, any of you that are watching, any of you that are listening here, ask yourself, if you are in a household and you're Mr. Mom, ask yourself whether or not that's what's best for the children. Because you can't nurture them the way mom can. You don't have a connection with them the way mom does because mom carried that child for 9 months before you ever saw it. There's a connection. There's a difference. And they need that. And they need the man to be able to do his role. And let me just give you an example. It always kills me, by the way. If you happen to drive by a place where it says men at work and men are actually working, because a lot of times you drive by and you see this stuff and nobody's doing anything, or you have 10 people talking. But if you happen to drive by and you see that people are working and you see that somebody is directing traffic with a stop sign, who's holding the stop sign? The woman, right? Because she's not physically as strong and capable of doing the digging that the man is. Let's just be honest. They say we want to be equal. They say, we say they want to be equal, and then we go ahead and differentiate anyway. If you're equal, roll up your sleeves, get down in the dirt, and start digging, and let a man have a break. Right? Is that politically correct? Not even close. Is that spiritually correct? I think absolutely. But like we talked about earlier today, don't take my word for it. This is not the way Rob would have the world and man and woman live. This is the way that the Creator would have his creation live. And guess what, folks? The only person that has the right to make any adjustments to the creation is the Creator himself. Nobody else has a right to change that. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the Father, and our faith is worse than her. It doesn't say if a woman doesn't provide for her relatives, for her household. Who's supposed to take care of the household? Well, I don't know, Rob. Those are just common terms that we use today. Those are pronouns. That's the word I was looking for. Those are just pronouns. No, it specifically is his, and he, meaning the man. Right? It's a shame when the man doesn't step up and take care of his responsibilities. Again, I'm not talking about if there's no father in the home or any of that. That's not what we're looking at here. And I do want to make the same point that I made in our Mother's Day sermon. And that is, biology does not create whether or not you can be a father to someone. If you're a man that hasn't raised kids and there's a woman out there or there's a child out there that doesn't have a father figure, you can absolutely do the things that a father should do for that child. And if that's not done by somebody, if everybody looks back and says, boy, things would be a whole lot better if he had a father, well, maybe you could help out in that regard, right? It might be better if you had, well, maybe you need to stand up. But as a man, you can step up and you can do these things. As a man, you can treat your wife the way that children see you treating them the way you should. So again, really the question is, not only are you being the father God created you to be, but are you being the man that God created you to be? Or have you let societal changes creep in, and have you allowed yourself to either change your role or allowed yourself to just not fulfill your role? Changing it is just as bad as not doing it, because it's not the way that God intended it, and it's not going to get you the results that you want. I'm not going to go buy bottled water right now because it's cheaper than gasoline and pour bottled water into the gas tank and expect it to do what it's supposed to do. It won't work. You have to use the things the way that they're intended. This is one of those lessons where I feel like it's tough to transition, and I don't necessarily feel, and we'll talk about this later, that you have to have an illustration at every sermon. But it is a good time for us, I've asked you to consider. And you know what? Ladies aren't off the hook. There's oh man, the men need to consider this. The men need to consider. Ladies, are you allowing yourself to be treated incorrectly? Are you choosing to take over his role? I mean, we both got to think, right? It's on both sides. This all comes down to, though, you can't agree with anything that I've had to say unless you agree with the Word of God. So anybody that's listening to this that doesn't believe in the Word of God is going to call me a hater, a bigot, prejudice, narcissist, all kinds of things. All I'm trying to do is tell you the way God created it. And if you can accept the fact that God created you for specific roles in your life, then you can expect that God gave you specific things that you have to do to be his child. It's that easy. If you can understand the sermon, then you can understand that God has expectations. When he makes a command, it's a command and there's no choice. You also understand that God is a father. If you look at the prodigal son and you bring it out and we analyze and stuff like that, we see that the father is represented by God, who is waiting for his child who is wayward. If you have sinned and gone against him, he's waiting for you to come back, and he's waiting with compassion. But you got to do what you need to do to make that happen. And if there's any way that we can help you do it, let us know while we stand and while we sing.